We stand today at the end of a liturgical year. This is the final Sunday of the year that began so innocently back last December. Given everything that's happened since then, I say, good riddance. Let's get this thing over with. But of course, that's not the kind of the year the church provides for us. The gift of the church in its shaping of our worship life is the assurance that the things of God keep returning, keep coming back to us again and again, so that we can learn their lessons in ever-deepening ways. Each year we hear the stories of Jesus in their great wide sweep, the promise of his coming into our world and gathering us up with him, heard each year in our cycle of readings through the lens of a particular evangelist. This year we've been listening as Matthew told us of Jesus, and next week we'll start our journey with Mark. But today, as Matthew closes out his gospel, and we close out our liturgical year, what is it that we hear? We hear first, of course, from the prophet Ezekiel, who rails against the shepherd kings of Israel, who have looked solely on their own needs and interests and left the sheep, God's own people, to be ravaged by any and all. They have shirked their responsibility, failing to look out for the common good, for the well-being of all God's people. And because of their neglect, their failure to stop injustice, their ignoring the shepherding role God had given them as kings, they will now be lost themselves. It is God who will step in, God who will be their new shepherd, tending the sick lambs, seeking those who have wandered off, bringing them home safely from all the places they've been scattered. And once God's people are restored, God will place a new king over Israel, one who will truly tend the sheep, who will put the needs of his people above any of his own needs. And it's there, of course, that the early Christians began to see hints of the one they now hailed as their king, the one called Jesus, who said he was their good shepherd. And on this Sunday that marks the end of the year, in Matthew, we see the shepherd king returning in glory, coming on the clouds to bring all things to their culmination. He is shepherd, sorting out between sheep and goats among his flock, and he is king, arriving with the power to judge, to bring crisis, is what it's called in the Greek. And crisis it is. A time for deciding has come, and the truth will now come to light. Every week we say it, that we believe he will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. But I'm not sure we really believe it. I'm not sure we believe that human history is headed in a direction, or that moments of decisions come to us that have permanent consequences, or that time will come when our or the world's choices will be shown in their fullness. But I think somewhere we do know this, that our own experience of human life shows us that it's true. We know that when human beings fail to love, what emerges is not the kingdom of heaven, is not the gracious rule of Christ the King, but rather a spiritual and sometimes material death that catches us all in its maw. Jesus says to us at the beginning of his public ministry that the kingdom of heaven has come near, that it's available right here, right now, in this day and age, not simply in the age to come. And that is part and parcel with what Jesus is saying now, at the end of his ministry. This morning's teachings from Jesus comes precisely at the moment when his passion is to begin. In the very next verse, he tells his disciples that in 2 days he must go to Jerusalem and that there he will be handed over and will be killed. He will, quite literally, give his last drop of blood, his last breath, for all God's children, for all of the sheep and all of the goats. Our Christ the King, it seems, has a very different notion of kingliness than the kings of this world have. The kings of this world have no concern for the sheep, but King Jesus does. The kings of the world care only for themselves, care only for their own lives. But King Jesus, the shepherd, lays his life down completely in order that his flock may live. And here are some other things to notice about King Jesus. Both the sheep and the goats are in his flock. Neither group has ever been outside the purview of his love. Their invitations to the heavenly party, to the place where love is all that's left, where every creature is pulsing with life, are exactly the same. They've each gotten an invitation with their name on the front. The difference is whether or not they've accepted it, whether they have believed that they were truly and utterly loved. And both groups have simply been going about their lives, living their ordinary days, until now, the days that are ordinary have finally come to an end, like the ordinary time of the church year that has come to an end for us. And what is the basis on which King Jesus will judge his flock, will judge all the nations of the earth? And do note, please, that it does say nations or peoples, not individuals, not persons. Is the basis for judgment about whether they have believed the right things, whether their beliefs they've professed have been orthodox? No, it is not. Does the judgment come on the basis of whether they have attended church, or kept in polite society, or voted in a particular way, or publicly claimed that Jesus was Lord? No, it does not. It says simply this: have they actually, truly, in the way they lived, given their lives away just as their Lord and King has done? Have they understood themselves to be the subject of one who has poured himself out, emptied himself at every possible change, has put love always and only at the center of his being? That is the question that he hands to them today. Have you loved the way I do? Have you loved the least and the lost and the broken and the downcast and those imprisoned and the sick and the hungry and the thirsty? And because he knows that if they truly understood that they were loved, not for what they did or what they kept from doing, not even for what they said they believed, if they knew they were loved just because, just as they were, before any doing or proving or changing, if they really knew that, then they couldn't help but know that every other person anywhere on this earth was just as worthy of grace and mercy and tender care and restoration and a hope-filled life as they were. And they would know that the one they called Lord had already taught that following him, subjecting their lives to his gracious rule, all boiled down to this one thing: loving their King and loving their neighbor as themselves. Because neither the goats nor the sheep were setting out intentionally with the purpose of finding God. They were simply going about their lives in the way that they had already made a decision to do that. They were either offering themselves in love to everyone they encountered, or they were not. They were either recognizing their kinship under God, with every other human being, and so cared for them as they would care for themselves, or they were not. The king in our story never once asks them to cite a creed or present their theological bona fides. He merely says, "Did you feed your neighbor who was hungry? Did you make certain that no one went without a home? Did you welcome the stranger into your home, your church, your country? Did you welcome them as your siblings in Christ? Did you look out not only for your own child, but for the child of every other mother? Did you care for those dying of COVID? Did you comfort the ones who were grieving? Because if you did, you were caring for me. Because that's where I am, in all the most vulnerable, in all the ones the world will tempt you to ignore, in all the ones your fear or revulsion or prejudice or blindness will tempt you to overlook or step away from. If you want to see me, says our King, if you want to be in relationship with me, if you want to know me better, then there is where you go. There is the place you will find me. In the places where the only power will be the power of love. The goats weren't evil. They were simply blind. They didn't see what was already true, that the kingdom could be right there among them, already starting now, today, when there was still freedom to decide. Now, today, when the needs around them were so great, when they had the opportunity by their own choices to love, to make this world more like the one that was finally coming. It was there, waiting for them to enter in, to love like it was the only thing that mattered, because it really was the only thing that mattered. And that, my friends, is the choice before us today. Will we love like Jesus, or won't we? Our choice will make all the difference for ourselves and for the world. If Jesus really is our King, then there is only one way to choose, and that is to choose the way of love. The love that was and is and always will be pouring itself out for us, no matter what we choose, but just because.